Okay, hey guys, welcome. We're starting our new series on this YouTube channel. So as you can see, I absolutely love to read and I love collecting books. I've always loved to read, but I will say that when I was in college, it was much harder with school and stuff. So when COVID happened, I decided to start reading a lot more books and like being more intentional about it. But also a pivotal moment is that growing up, I realized I was reading a lot of books by non-Black authors. So one thing I decided to do during COVID was be more intentional about reading more Black authors. So this means African American, Caribbean, African, like as long as you're Black, I'm prioritizing reading books by Black authors. And 99% of my books here are by Black authors. I think I have maybe 3 that aren't. So yeah, so let's start this book review. I read 6 books this month. Yeah, I was really dedicated. My goal was 5, but I decided to add one more. So let's get into them. So the first book is The Accidental Diva by Tia Williams. If you know me, you know that I absolutely love Tia Williams. Like her romance novels are 10 out of 10 for me. And this is one of, I think this was her first book, honestly. Yeah, it was. And I've seen so much growth. I recently read A Love Song for Ricky Loud, and that Tia Williams writing that is not the same Tia Williams that wrote this book. 2 different people. Like even 7 Days in June, even The Perfect Fine. Like absolutely love her. So one thing I will say about this book, it is a very cute romance. It's about this person, Billy. The main character is Billy, works for a magazine, and I think Tia Williams also used to work for a magazine before she started getting into like writing books. And essentially, she's like this fashion editor, just running through the world and just being amazing and trying to date. Yeah, so she's trying to date and try to navigate that world, and she meets someone like from a completely different background from her, and essentially they make it work and like merge each other's worlds together. So it is a really cute romance novel. I absolutely enjoyed it, and I think I will give this a 3.5 out of 5 because it wasn't a bad story. It was actually really nice and interesting and engaged, and it's not that long of a read. It's just I think maybe because I've read her most recent work and I'm like, I know what she's capable of, that this just felt a tad bit shorter. Like, yeah, I think it's a cute read. I think that if you want something that you can read really quick, I would highly recommend. And it's, who doesn't love a good romance story? The next book I read is a really short book. I think it's about 100 and something pages. It's Assembly by Natasha Brown. So this book was a very like I've seen a lot of people talk about it, so I decided to pick it up. So it's a coming of age story about like being Black in the workspace and things like that. I think that what this book talked about is really important in terms of like navigating and like being a Black person in a white space. I also think that the questions the main character was asking herself, like, is this what I'm worth? Is this where I'm supposed to be? Like all these different questions. I think that that is something that I know I've asked myself sometimes, but the writing style was a little off for me, and I didn't. It was kind of a lot. Like I don't. It was kind of too much in the sense that when I read, I love to glide through the pages and just get immersed in the story. But it was really hard for me to do that here. The reason I really finished it is because, like I said, it's 100 pages. So, yeah, if this book was much longer, I definitely wouldn't. I would have not finished it, so DNF'd it. But I think I gave this a 2 out of 5. The next book we're gonna review is Butter Honey Pig Bread. The name of this book I keep thinking is Honey Butter Bread Pig, but literally the opposite. Butter Honey Pig Bread is the name of this book. This is by a Nigerian author. I was really excited to read this book. I was supposed to buddy read it with some friends back in February, but I just could not finish. Only one person, I think it was three of us, only one person actually finished it. The other person barely got through the first couple of pages. I at least got through halfway, and I just didn't finish. But this month I decided to try something else, and for the first time ever listen to an audiobook. So I listened to the rest of the book. And it bored me. So I really hate to say that, but I was absolutely bored reading this book. I was kind of shocked because so many people have raved about this book. Some people say that this book is one of their favorite books, but I just couldn't get into it. Like I just couldn't. So essentially, it's about like two twins, Taye and Kende, and their mom. So their mom is supposed to be some kind of like obanje, some type of spirit, and then Kende, unfortunately, trigger warning, there was some sexual assault, and she was raped by an uncle. Taye was going through her thing, and part of that was being a lesbian from a Nigerian background. So it was like really interesting in terms of like the different dynamics that existed within this book. But I just, something about this book just was so odd for me, and like maybe it was the story. But I will say that one thing I did like about this book was how rich the writing was. I think that the author did an amazing job with the language. Loved the language, but it just wasn't for me. And I think that maybe it's just the story wasn't for me, or something that I was really interested in or related to. But I am giving this book a 2, maybe 2.5 out of 5. Everything Good Will Come by Sefi Atta. This is a historical fiction of Nigeria, specifically Lagos, Nigeria. It's a coming of age story, and it's from the perspective. It follows the story of two young girls, but we only get the perspective of one of the girls, and I wish we got the perspective of the other friend. So essentially, Enitan is the main character, and then her best friend Sherry. So it talks about how they were starting from primary school, secondary, and then just moving up to college and just work life and stuff like that. And it touched briefly on the Biafra War that happened at the start of the book, but then really touched in a lot of the military rule in Nigeria. So it was a lot of significance of that in the book. And when I tell you that Eniton really pissed me off, like this is actually a book club read, and we were talking about it. She really was upsetting me because she was doing things that she had no business doing. The army sometimes would take over. There were so many coups that were going on in Nigeria, and Eniton had, I'm sorry, I might spoil it, but not really a spoiler, just a little bit, had suffered a miscarriage, and she was fortunate to get pregnant again, and she um, just kept messing up and putting herself in harm's way. And it was just really pissing me off. And I'm not going to spoil it, but I do think that this is an interesting read. I gave this a 3.5 out of 5 just because um, something about the story was just, there's so many holes in the story that I didn't necessarily like, that the author just needed to fill. Like, for example, when I wish we got Sherry's perspective. That was a hole that I really wanted to fill. Even the ending felt a bit rushed. But if you want a good like historical fiction on Nigeria, or what it was like post Civil War, I would, or and post Nigeria democracy, I would look into this. I would think that this is a really good book to read. The next book I'm going to be talking about is One More Shot by Anise Starr. I read the first book. I think it's somewhere over here. Oh, it's right there. One Week in Paradise was the first book. I read that, and this is the third book. The second book I read as an ebook, so I didn't get a copy, but I wanted to get a copy of the third one. And honestly, I really, really enjoyed this book. It was a really good romance story. I think that within the series, I think One Week of Paradise, which was the first book, was the best, and then this was followed by this, and then the second book was the third in terms of ranking. But they're all pretty good books. I would give this a 4 out of 5. It's about a romance story about this photographer and a guy that she meets. So essentially, this all three stories tied together is like different people's love stories. So in the beginning, we had in the book one, we had the love story of the sister of the guy in this book. And then we had the love story of the best friend of the sister in book two. And now we have the brother's love story. So it all ties together. And I think it's a really good book. For like a cute romance story, I would say I recommend reading the series to kind of get understanding of the dynamics of the different relationships. But I don't think you necessarily have to read the first or the second to enjoy this book. But overall, I will give this a 4 out of 5. I love this. I was fortunate enough to actually get an advanced copy of this book, but I just took forever to read it. And I actually wanted to read the physical copy, so I bought it. Lastly, we have my favorite book of the month. So this is The Untelling by Tayari Jones. I have read all her books, all 4 of her books. I think 5. I think I've read American Marriage, Silver Sparrow, Leaving Atlanta. Leaving Atlanta is right here. Silver Sparrow is right there, and American Marriage is right here. So I've read all 4. This is the 4th one, and she's probably a really high author. I really wish she would write another book because I really, really enjoy this. And she, all her books are based in Atlanta, which I think is really interesting. I believe she's from there. But don't quote me on that. But as someone who lives in Atlanta, I think that is really interesting to hear about the different spaces, like when she's talking about this highway or MLK. I'm like, oh my gosh, I know what that is. But I am not an Atlanta native. I just moved there recently. But anyway, this is a really good, I would say, kind of a coming of age story. It's about Aria Jackson. So essentially, they, like, she got into an accident when they were younger, and it talks about just their life going forward, and what happens to the survivors of that accident, which Aria was one of. It says it here. I'm not spoiling it, I promise. So I'm not going to tell you the 2 people who died, but it's a family of 5. 2 people passed away in the car accident. So it just talks about the remaining characters and just their family secrets and the different things that go on in the family dynamic, and just Aria's journey too as a person. It's so I really love that. And I think all of her books, when they talk about colleges, it's usually Spelman or Morehouse. I think that's really cute. Shout out to HBCUs. Yeah, so it just talks about Aria, 25, who discovers that she may be pregnant, and then talking about like what happened to her in the past, the implications of that accident that took 2 of her family members' lives, and just talks about the different things that go on. And it has some little historical context into it, but yeah, this is more contemporary fiction in my opinion. But I really, really enjoy this. I would give this a 4.5 out of 5. Yeah. Okay, there we have it. These are the 6 books I read this month. Please let me know if you've read any of these, if there are any books you want me to review. I have a whole lot of books. So I'm going to be talking about like maybe giving some romance recs, some thriller recs, contemporary fiction, books by Nigerian authors, Ghanaian authors. Yeah, let me know.